It is the 41st millennium. For more than 100 centuries, the Emperor of mankind has sat immobile on the golden throne of Earth. He is the master of mankind by the will of the gods, and master of 1,000,000 worlds by the might of his inexhaustible armies. He is a rotting carcass, writhing invisibly with power from the dark age of technology. He is the carrion lord of the vast imperium of man, for whom 1,000 souls are sacrificed every day, so that he may never truly die. Yet even in his deathless state, the Emperor continues his eternal vigilance. Mighty battle fleets cross the demon-infested miasma of the warp, the only route between distant stars, their way lit by the Astronomicon, the psychic manifestation of the Emperor's will. To be a man in such times is to be one amongst untold billions. It is to live in the cruelest and most bloody regime imaginable. These are the tales of those times. Forget the power of technology and science, for so much has been forgotten, never to be relearned. Forget the promise of progress and understanding, for in the Grimdark Future there is only war. There is no peace among the stars, only an eternity of carnage and slaughter, and the laughter of thirsting gods. Welcome, friends and foes, survivors and killers. Let's sit around the campfire together and talk about Dead by Daylight. Specifically, the sci-fi universe of Warhammer 40,000, and the potential and problems of adapting the grim darkness of the far future into a licensed chapter for Dead by Daylight. Hey, remember that DBD community survey malarkey that Behaviour pushes out every so often? Well, not too long ago, we saw Behaviour in one of these surveys asking players to pick out their favourite licenses from a list in various categories to gauge excitement for potential future crossovers. This is pretty normal fare for a community survey, and seeing what's on a list for these surveys tends to provide some indication to players as to where Behaviour might be looking for future licenses to work with. Of course, big names like Five Nights at Freddy's, It, and Alien are often present in these surveys. Wow, wouldn't it be cool if Alien came to DBD, right? But it's these slightly more eclectic names that always catch my eye. Megan and Magic the Gathering appearing as options last time made me feel incredibly pleased with myself, because Megan is genuinely a dream license of mine that I think could actually be on the table for next year, and Magic in DBD would be so surreal but could paradoxically work. I just can't get the idea out of my head. But right at the bottom of the gaming section in this survey was a name I have a long and complicated history with, but have never considered in the context of Dead by Daylight before. The tabletop game Warhammer 40k. For the uninitiated, Warhammer, made by the British studio Games Workshop, is a tabletop war game where armies of miniatures collected, assembled and painted by players do battle using tape measures, dice, and an increasingly complicated stack of general and faction-specific rules. Think of it like an RTS like Total War, except you leave your house and meet people to play it. Shocking, I know. There are technically two different games produced by Games Workshop under the Warhammer label. The gothic sci-fi hellscape of Warhammer 40,000, commonly known as 40k, and the fantastical setting of a game that used to be known as just Warhammer before it got rebranded about 10 years ago into Warhammer Age of Sigmar. While both settings have their fair share of fans, 40k has always been the more popular of the two, and it's been Games Workshop's defining brand since the first edition of the game's rules, Warhammer 40,000 Rogue Trader. Released in 1987, Rogue Trader introduced the grimdark world of 40k to the wider gaming landscape. And since then, Warhammer, both its fantastical and sci-fi settings, have been licensed out to or crossed over with many third parties, resulting in licensed video games like Bolt Gun, Dark Tide and Space Hulk Deathwing, alongside crossovers like World of Tanks, which saw Imperial armour like the Lehman Russ battle tank incorporated into the game's roster. Just a couple of warnings before we get going. This video is going to have a lot of, for what I want to say, autism babble, where I just go on about certain names or figures from 40k's long history, and you don't have to care about that. Unless spending time on it, it doesn't really matter. So, just a word of warning for that one. Oh, and before anybody asks, I am going to go back to covering less niche media than tabletop games and indie horror films in potential problems going forwards. I just wanted to steer clear of the Hollywood writers' strike. I'm not exactly a union member, I'm not even American, but I still wanted to show some solidarity with the writers at the time because they were getting kind of shafted. and I'm not sure whether, now that their strike is over but the active strike is still continuing, I should carry on my little stance of solidarity. I kind of leave that up to you, really. Tell me what you guys reckon. I do have plenty of problems planned out for Repo the Jetic Opera, for Terminator, and I even got Child's Play in the drafting stages. And those were going to be when the strikes are finished. But if you want to see those earlier, let me know, and I might just do them anyway. This is also why I haven't done a Saw 10 video yet, although I really fucking want to do that. Alien's a little bit different because DBD working with Alien made me kind of have to talk about it, and talk about it in the context of Dead by Daylight in particular. But at this point, when I've had the choice to pick non-AMPTP media to do videos on, I've chosen it where I can. If you guys think that should stop, I'll leave that decision up to you, but I hope you understand where my stance has been so far. From what I've described so far, Warhammer doesn't seem like the kind of property behaviour would get into bed with, going from major Hollywood names like Halloween, Nightmare on Elm Street and Alien, to a somewhat niche British tabletop wargame where you paint toy soldiers and roll dice a lot. It looks like quite a big step in a very strange direction. So what does behaviour seem to see in this fine little game from Nottingham to bother putting it in this community survey in the first place? Today we'll be unpacking what makes Warhammer as a setting tick from the point of view of horror, discussing killer and survivor candidates for a potential Warhammer chapter, and we'll be ending as usual with a power concept for my choice of a killer from the setting. So what's going on with Warhammer 40k that puts it on the radar of a company that makes a horror game? Well, I'd like long-term friends of the channel to cast their minds back to the Knight's Tome release earlier in 2023, where I drew lots of attention to the stylistic choices made during the telling of that story that align it with a concept known as Grimdark. Grimdark is loosely defined as excessive darkness and edginess in a setting to the point of absurdity, where it isn't used in an attempt to generate the illusion of realism but instead become the stylistic choice, where being over-the-top edgy is part of the point. While Forge and Fog and a few other chapters like Cursed Legacy and Chains of Hate thrive on a heavy veneer of cynicism and darkness that eclipses actual realism, Dead by Daylight on the whole has shades of this, where the pervasiveness of the entity's bottomless malice hangs over the entire setting to give the entire thing a hopeless and despondent tone, depicting any struggle for a better life as being totally futile in the face of its infinite evil. Warhammer 40k literally invented the idea of grimdark. The term comes from the game's former tagline, "In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war." And while it has started to slightly tone it down in recent years, the setting still more than earns its reputation as a sci-fi setting so richly dark that it wraps around to being a horror setting almost by default. And nowhere is that showcased better than the Imperium of Man, the human empire that forms the core of the game's marketing and receives by far the most focus and support of all the game's many factions. Most spacefaring sci-fi settings have some sort of major human or at least human-centric power as the central authority in the middle of that setting, and the presentation of these authorities can vary wildly. They can be broadly good, only really sullied by individual bad actors, like the Federation of Star Trek or the Rebel Alliance of Star Wars, or they can be more morally ambiguous, like the UNSC in Halo or the Terrans in StarCraft. Sometimes this authority is evil, like the Weyland-Yutani Corporation in Alien. And when this happens, a major part of the story will often involve taking them down, or otherwise stopping whatever evil plan they're working on. The Imperium of Man is quite different, because despite being the, I'm going to use heavy scare quotes for this one, protagonists of the setting, the Imperium is pretty much the worst kind of dystopian society you could possibly imagine. The Imperium is a fascist interstellar theocracy, somewhere between the Holy Roman Empire, Stalinist Russia, 1984's INGSOC, and the fucking Third Reich, but in space. For 10,000 years, the human race has worshipped the god Emperor of Man, whose body was preserved at the moment of his death and interred in the Golden Throne, a life support system that demands the sacrifice of 1,000 souls per day to keep him alive. The worlds of the Imperium are run in his stead by the High Lords of Terror and the Administratum, a gigantic bureaucracy struggling under the weight of trying to maintain an empire spanning an entire galaxy. And that empire is beset on all sides, but not just hostile aliens or planetary rebellions, but demons, and those who worship them as the pawns of eldritch gods of chaos. Things that many sci-fi settings would take for granted, like robots and faster-than-light travel, are turned on their head in the Imperium of Man and given a thick coating of grimdark. No protocol droids or quirky robot companions here. A paranoid distrust of AI, and thousands of years of human research and development having been lost completely during the dark age of technology and the age of strife, have meant that there are very few human-built robots left in the setting. Instead, much of the grunt work is done by living people forcefully lobotomized and turned into cyborg servitors. Faster-than-light travel is similarly bastardized. Most sci-fi settings approach FTL travel with a healthy amount of technobabble. Some sufficiently advanced technology that lets them get from point A to point B as fast as the plot demands. The Imperium has a much more brutal method of navigating the galaxy. They tear a hole in the universe and take a shortcut through hell to get vaguely where and when they need to go. The warp is a realm of horrors outside the universe altogether, populated by the aforementioned demons, the Chaos Gods who created them, and other horrible extra-dimensional gribblies, and the only thing that means that any ships get where they're meant to go is the Astronomicon, a psychic beacon projected into the warp by the Golden Throne, using the last of the Emperor's strength to help ships navigate the warp like a lighthouse. So that sacrifice of 1,000 souls a day to keep him alive, that isn't just religious veneration, but it is necessary for the continued function of the Imperium, and if they stop even for a day, that could cast the human race into darkness forever. The Imperium of Man is a hellhole, a nightmare of human suffering that is religiously intolerant and totally xenocidal, both as religious scripture and government policy. The life of every human within its reach is sustained by an endless slaughterhouse at the foot of the Golden Throne, and the pencil pushers administratum, who could easily condemn your world to death by forgetting a decimal point or misreading a cargo delivery code, that sees your besieged planet stocked with children's pool inflatables instead of food, weapons, or military reinforcements. Such a grimdark universe is absolutely chock full of horror elements because there really is a new nightmare around every corner. Even discounting the horrors of the Imperium itself, or renegade human factions and the dark gods that they worship, there's tons of hostile alien species too. If you're not being eaten alive by Tyranids, which are giant space locusts that basically xenomorphs on lots on with the growth hormones, or surgically disassembled by Necrons, zombie robots possessed by the spirits of long-dead alien space Egyptians who harness the power of stars to strip the armour and flesh from your bones one molecule at a time, and you might just get captured by the Dark Eldar, who'll torture you for decades before they kill you, in part for fun, but also because they literally feed on your pain. Even a tiny slice of 40k's galaxy of nightmares will be a more than welcome inclusion in the fog, and if implemented tastefully, could blend amazingly with Dead by Daylight's cosmic horror angle and the increasing emphasis as of late on sci-fi horror. The Imperium is an empire of misery and death, the kind of place that would be indisputably villainous in basically any other setting. And in their current circumstances, it's kind of the best humanity's got. Don't get me wrong here, this isn't Games Workshop endorsing fascist governments here, despite what some figures in the community would have you believe. Games Workshop has explicitly turned away the small group of neo-fascist followers the Imperium and its aesthetics have cultivated over the years, which is fantastic. Fuck those guys with a spade up the urethra. But the Imperium remains 40k's nominal protagonist faction, simply because, thanks to the mistakes of the Emperor and other figures throughout human history, the Imperial way of life is the only option the human race has left to survive on a large scale, with the alternatives being capitulation to the other factions and races out there who are, for the most part, even worse than they are. Oh yeah, and Space Marines are really popular, so they make Games Workshop a shit ton of money, can't forget that. The life of the average Imperial citizen sucks really hard. But when basically every alien race that you find sees you either as slaves, lunch, or occasionally both, suddenly the policy of exterminating any alien life as soon as you see it makes a little bit more sense. And the only humans in the galaxy that live outside the Imperium will happily tear your gizzards out and sacrifice them to the Chaos Gods at its slightest provocation. So while the Imperium by all accounts absolutely sucks, 40k's universe as a whole sucks so much more, people tend to just live with it. This is where the horror of Warhammer setting resides most clearly, and I think it's why behaviour saw the IP's potential for Dead by Daylight. There's no one big scary thing to be afraid of in this world, but instead an endless catalogue of terrors baked so fundamentally into its fabric that you start to take it for granted sometimes. Within 40k setting, each individual faction has its fair share of nightmare fuel, with the arguable exception of the Tau and the Leagues of Votan, unless you happen to be scared of Gundams or short people. But when taken outside of 40k's own context, the shit that goes on here is more than horrific enough to find a home in the fog. The Black Library, which is G-Dub's fiction publishing arm, understands this very well. And alongside the normal releases of stories detailing military campaigns or characters from the tabletop game, the Warhammer horror range exists to exploit the nightmarish world of 40k without holding anything back. 40k's galaxy is one of strife, misery, and horrors beyond imagining, and bringing just a sliver of that into the fog would be a fitting inclusion to the roster of the entity. And the sheer vastness of this 30-year setting lends itself to a huge variety of options of potential killers and themes to look out for in a chapter. In my history of making these potential problems videos, I've never spitballed so many different power and character designs for a killer, because Warhammer is so teeming full of aliens, monsters, and just absolute bastards that could be pressed into service of the entity. Let's go through this little shortlist here. Tyranid Warrior, Tyranid Lictor, Tyranid Prime, Nob, Meganob, Painboy, Big Mech, Warboss, Calican, Dark Reapers, Dragon Scorpion, Howling Banshee, Warp Spider, Succubus, Incubus, Mandrake, Hellion Grotesque, Rack, Pain, Salter, Hemonk, Death Sister, Dish God, Gene Stealer, Source Battle Sister, Sister of Pensha, Commissar, Tech Priest, Archivage, Inquisitor, Custodian, Sister of Silence, any Operatives, the Official Assassinorum, any Chaos Demon, or any Loyalist or Traitor Space Marine. I need to lie down. This is excluding any named characters from the game's history too. Major figures like the Silent King of the Necrons or Ephrael Sturm, the rogue battle sister blessed with psychic powers by the Emperor himself. After all, trying to fold Games Workshop's established story for these characters into Dead by Daylight's constraints could cause some issues. Although I'm sure a lot of players would love to see their favourite characters like Khan the Betrayer or Ghazghkull Thraka spill some blood in the fog. The problem is that most of these characters are just too damn broken for Dead by Daylight because 40k's power scaling is off the fucking charts. To get a sense of what I mean by this, the rank-and-file Imperial Guardsman is kitted out with laser weapons similar to a blaster from Star Wars. You know, that thing that kills armoured stormtroopers in a single shot. But those things are considered pretty piss-poor by standards of the setting, and are only dished out because they're easy to mass-produce and easy to maintain. The rank-and-file Space Marine instead has a semi-automatic rifle firing bullets as big as a hamster, and often has a chainsaw sword the size of, well, you, is it doesn't get the job done. The characters considered noteworthy enough to tell stories about, therefore, are so jacked up full of badass that condensing them into a killer would feel cheap. Not to mention what I consider one of the Warhammer setting's strongest assets. Its vast expansive universe that allows anyone to tell their own story. Take a little corner of the galaxy and make your dudes that fit seamlessly into it. The room to do your own thing with the tools the universe gives you could give behaviour the creative room to make more or less whatever they wanted. To do a Danny Johnson for the Warhammer universe and create our own character, using existing lore and setting as a template. Games Workshop has a long history of giving their licensed game partners a good deal of freedom to make their own characters and integrate them into their projects. For example, the devs of the hack-and-slash shooter Space Marine created Captain Titus of the Ultramarine Second Company, an original character integrated into a Space Marine chapter that existed in the canon for years by then. And he proved popular enough that he's coming back for Space Marine 2, that should be releasing later this year. Fucking Saber! Dead by Daylight could have its own Captain Titus, a canon foreigner introduced to the game in an organic way to make transition between IPs as seamless as possible. But if not who, then what should we pick as a killer? As I said, there's a lot of options to develop into a full character. Let's think like Games Workshop for a second, because I think the writing is very much on the wall here. The most iconic image in Warhammer history is the Adeptus Astartes, commonly known as Space Marines, the heavily armed and armoured superhumans who serve as the ultimate symbol of the Emperor's power and divine presence, descending into the worst war zones the galaxy has to offer to bring Imperial peace to a hostile universe. They are his Angels of Death, and they've been at the middle of Games Workshop's marketing strategy for ages now. I don't see a universe where one of the several alien races of the setting would get a killer slot in the game over one of these guys. Not necessarily because they don't deserve it or anything, I firmly believe they do. I just know that Space Marines are simultaneously Games Workshop's biggest cash cow by far, and also the most recognisable symbol of Warhammer 40k for anybody outside the immediate fan group. A chapter at its core is a marketing opportunity both for Dead by Daylight and for whatever license they end up working with. And Space Marines have shown throughout the years that they are by far the best way that Games Workshop has of marketing their game and 40k's universe on a large scale. My personal pick would be something in the vein of a Necron Lichguard, a member of the Homunculus Covens, or one of the cyborg berserkers from the Eversaw Temple of Imperial Assassins. But Games Workshop has Space Marine fetish and the popularity can't be disputed, so let's play into that. I know there's a load of corrupted or renegade Astartes who could easily be coerced into the entity's service. But hear me out on this one. What makes Chaos Space Marines so memorable as a faction is when they're contrasted with their loyalist counterparts. Without Imperial Marines to oppose them, Chaos Marines is a lot of their impact. Remember what I was saying about the Imperium being a shitty place? Well, wouldn't it be fitting for the extreme grimdarkness of the setting if the entity was able to recruit not a traitor marine, but a loyal one? I mean, it's not like loyalist marines always have a great relationship with the people they're trying to protect after all. For every Space Marine chapter full of genuinely altruistic and self-sacrificing heroes of humanity, there's like 3 or 4 that literally just murder civilians because they feel like it. I have a bit of an idea here that I'd like your thoughts on. The Blood Angels are a chapter of Space Marines who take the idea of being the Emperor's Angels of Death very, very literally. From the heavens they descend on jump packs or in low atmosphere drop pods to bring the heat directly to the Emperor's enemies, and they decorate their armour and war gear with images of angels in memory of the Primarch who created them. The winged paragon of virtue, Sanguinius. But they hold a dark secret. But let's be real here, no one's allowed to have anything nice in the Imperium. 10,000 years ago, in the final hours of the Emperor's life before the Golden Throne, Sanguinius died. Brutally. So brutally, in fact, that his gene sons are still psychically traumatised by the incident 10,000 years later, and every so often, through no fault of their own, one of them snaps. Kinda like I do when I wake up in the morning to read a Carnivorous Thirst tweet in my notifications. Khan, you are my friend and I value you immensely, but Jesus Christ woman, get a hobby or a cat or something. Every so often, a Blood Angel will lose themselves in what's called the Black Rage, where they hallucinate themselves to be Sanguinius himself, fighting for his life in the last hours of the Horus Heresy. And in this state, they see everyone else with a pulse as Horus, the arch-traitor who struck Sanguinius down all those years ago. These Marines, insensible to pain and filled with an unquenchable bloodlust, are taken aside by their battle brothers and consigned to the Death Company with others who fall into the Black Rage. The Death Company are girded in black armour with red saltires to warn others that they are a lost cause, kitted out with powerful melee weapons, and more or less hurled into battle for one last glorious heroic charge against whatever enemy of the Imperium happens to be within chainswording distance. Once battle is done, any members of the Death Company who somehow survive the battle are rounded up and euthanized, because there is no cure for the Black Rage. Once it takes you, you're gone for good. You're a liability to yourself and those around you, and at the end of the day, being put to rest after one last glorious battle is a dignified way to go, at least by the Imperium standards. But what if a member of the Death Company found themselves missing from that battlefield, taken to a whole other elsewhere to take out his eternal burning rage on other, more helpless targets? The entity has a long history of brainwashing its killers to make them more compliant. It's highly implied that some of the saner killers, like Deathslinger and the Twins, are given hallucinations of the survivors they kill to ensure their continued compliance. So it's pretty convenient that the Marines of the Death Company come pre-packaged with their own hallucinations and eternal bloodlust to drive them to kill literally anything in front of them. Wouldn't it be fitting to have the killer representative from one of fiction's bleakest and most thoroughly grim settings not to be some moustache-twirling villain, but a literal fallen angel, warped by cruelty and misfortune into a raving, blood-soaked lunatic? Before I get onto a power concept for my choice of killer, you gotta ask the question, what options does a setting of super soldiers, alien monsters, and demon-possessed mutants have for a survivor? The unfortunate answer is, there isn't very many of them. Kind of like the killer options, most of the lead singers of the 40k universe are superhumans with a capital super, and several miles above the pay grade of your average killer. So of course a valid option exists similar to the killer, to create a Danny Johnson-esque original character inside the 40k universe, but I have an alternative in mind. Those familiar with the stories of Sandy Mitchell, Commissar Caiaphas Kane is a name that will need no introductions. Kane serves in the Imperial Guard as a Commissar, basically a political officer who exists to ensure the Guard regiment remains loyal to the Imperial interests and keep morale high among the troops. And the way that most Commissars do this is by executing dissenters in the Guard ranks to motivate their comrades. The idea is to make the remaining Guardsmen more scared of the Commissar behind them than the enemy in front of them. Kane, however, tries a different approach. And while he has had to kill dissenters before, he doesn't make a habit of it, because at the end of the day, Kane is the one thing that's very rare in this setting: a pragmatist. He prioritises his own self-interest above everything else, and pissing off a bunch of trained soldiers because you shot their friend Gerald in the face is not conducive to one's self-preservation. Kane's strategy for leadership is based around something that he calls long-term cowardice. He'll take whatever course of action he can that's most likely to end in his long-term survival, even if that course of action requires taking massive short-term risks. He'll take on Tyranid bioweapons or superhuman Chaos Space Marines in close quarters combat because he knows that these guys don't take prisoners. Even if the chances of survival are slim, they're better chances than the no chances at all that he has if he turns and runs. This is a mentality that would translate really well to a survivor, because long-term cowardice is surviving in the fog down to a T. When you're stuck in a trial with a killer, sometimes you've got to do dangerous things. You've got to get that guy off the hook, you've got to distract the killer, you've got to make difficult choices and take some risks in the interest of your own survival. If you just cower and hide, eventually you are going to die, and Kane's philosophy will make him naturally suited to surviving the horrors of the entity. Plus, when you've stared down Tyranids, orcs and the perils of the warp, what's Evan Macmillan going to do to you? Of course, he's not exactly too powerful. At the end of the day, he is just a guy when his las pistol and chainsword have been taken away from him. And a lot of his problems in the sci-fi Kane novels get solved either by his attendant Jurgen firing anti-tank laser at the problem, if he remembers to run to hold the gun, or his hyper-competent Inquisitor girlfriend Amberly Vale, who basically has a part-time job getting Kane out of or occasionally into daring scrapes. He has a reputation among the Imperial gentry as a hero of the Imperium, and spends most of his time off duty at planetary governors' functions or cocktail parties, kissing babies and shaking hands. But when the chips are down, Kane's just a guy, trying to survive the battlefields of the 41st millennium, and seeing how insane and grim the world of 40k is, from the point of view of someone just trying to survive it, makes you want to see him succeed. Sci-fi Kane is beloved in the 40k community for a good reason. He's considered the Edmund Blackadder or Harry Flashman of the setting, because he takes something that should be unremittingly bleak and depressing and adds a little bit of levity to it. Pokes fun at the weirdness and over-the-topness of the whole thing, with just the right amount of self-awareness. Sci-fi Kane would be the ideal candidate for a survivor from Warhammer's big dark galaxy. Just a man trying to live through the nightmares of the world he was born into, so he can sit back with a warm bowl of Tanner and watch the universe pass him by. And maybe get rich and famous. You know, just the basics of life really. Granted, he is dressed quite a lot like a Nazi though, which is standard for the Imperium, and I know he has a good chance of putting some people off if they don't get exactly what kind of deconstruction of the Imperial propaganda narrative Kane and his stories represent. I don't think even if he were to get a 40k chapter that Kane would be on the menu for a survivor, but I felt the video would be incomplete without at least talking about the guy. He'd be a real treat for 40k story enthusiasts, and could lead to some really interesting perk designs that capitalise on Kane's unique take on leadership. What kind of perks could these look like? Well, I'll be getting to that, because traditionally for Potential Problems videos, I decided to put my game design brain to work designing a power for a Space Marine of the Death Company, well as perks for both him and the hero of the Imperium himself, Sci-fi Kane. Tell me what you think. The Lost is a tall killer who moves at 115%. His weapon is the Eviscerator Chainsword and the power is called Rage Unto Death. Comes in two parts, Jump Pack and the Black Rage. The Jump Pack has 2 charges, recharge at a rate of 1 charge every 20 seconds. The Jump Pack can only be used when both charges are full. Activate the Jump Pack when facing any direction to travel in that direction in a straight line at a speed of 190% for 16 meters. This includes vertically, allowing Jump Pack to be used in temporary flight. When a charge is used, the Lost travels at 50% speed and falls 25% speed for 1.5 seconds, and cannot perform any actions other than using a charge of Jump Pack during this time. Boosting yourself into a pallet or breakable wall using the Jump Pack will cause you to immediately end your movement and break the object. Now let's talk about the Black Rage. Separate to the Jump Pack's charge system, displayed in a separate counter on the HUD, the Lost has a Rage meter. The Rage meter gains charges under the following conditions. A non-obsession survivor stuns or blinds the Lost, giving 10% charges. The obsession stuns or blinds the Lost to give 20%. If the Lost injures a healthy survivor with a basic attack, they gain 25% of their charge, and if they injure a healthy obsession with a basic attack, they gain 35%. At 100%, the Black Rage will activate for 75 seconds, regardless whether or not the killer chooses to do so. During the Black Rage, the killer benefits from the following effects. Basic attacks with the Eviscerator Chainsword will break pallets and breakable walls as it hits. The killer's lunge range is extended by 60%, and basic attacks against non-obsession survivors will cause that survivor who gets hit to become the obsession. In addition to this, the Jump Pack will unlock a new ability, Angel of Death. While Angel of Death is active, the first survivor who collides with the Lost during a Jump Pack dash will be picked up by the killer and carried for the dash's duration. Survivors who are pushed into a solid object or being carried during Angel of Death, or dropped from a great height after being carried into the air by Angel of Death, will lose a health state on impact, either with a wall or with the ground. Survivors who are landed on by survivors dropped from a great height by Angel of Death also receive a health state of damage. Survivors hit by Angel of Death cannot leave the trial for 6 seconds after being hit. And I got a stack of add-ons as well, so tell me what you think of those. But before we move on, I've got perks here for the Lost and Sci-Fast Cane. The killer perks are as follows. Descent of Angels. Whenever the killer falls from a great height, they gain haste for 6 seconds, on a 60-second cooldown. The Red Thirst. A survivor taking damage from any source afflicts the hemorrhage status effect until healed. Whenever a survivor affected by hemorrhage has a healing action counted on them while they are injured, they become broken for a short time. None shall stay my wrath. Survivors who take a protection hit will be affected by None shall stay my wrath until they are healed or put into the dying state. Survivors affected by this perk suffer a penalty to generator repair and healing speeds. This perk will not be applied to a survivor if that survivor they're taking a protection hit for has been unhooked in the last 12 seconds. And the survivor perks are as follows. Tactical Retreat. Whenever you become unhooked or unhook a survivor, Tactical Retreat will activate. Whenever you or the survivor you unhooked or unhooked you takes a hit while Tactical Retreat is active, the survivor maintains their post-hit speed boost for an additional 1.5 seconds. Hero of the Imperium. Whenever you complete a healing action on another survivor, exhaustion is removed from you if you have it. Whenever you become exhausted, you see the killer's aura for a short time. And leading from the back, you see the auras of all survivors repairing or healing within 24 meters of you. Whenever another survivor completes a good skill check within 24 meters of you, leading from the back gains a token, to a maximum of 3. Footsteps and grunts of pain you make become quieter for each token. At 3 tokens, entering or leaving a locker quickly becomes silent, and you make no noise when you're inside one. Lose all tokens leading from the back when you get hooked. Hopefully all of this, the effort I've gone to here, illustrates why I was so keen to make this video. Because as soon as I saw the little ticky box in that community survey with Warhammer 40k next to it, I knew what I had to do. Games Workshop is known for being freer with their license than COVID-19 at Boris Johnson's Christmas party. They have a wide circle of smaller studios they tend to trust with their projects, such as Fat Shark, the Swedish studio behind both Vermintide games and 40k's Darktide. But they've also been known to work with bigger studios too, like Saber Interactive, who are working on Space Marine 2, and Creative Assembly, who've made 3 total Warhammer games to date. I guarantee you, if Behaviour wanted the Warhammer license for a DBD release, Games Workshop would give it to them like that. If M. Cote can bring Disney to the table for an Alien chapter, then I have zero doubt Games Workshop would practically hand it to them on a silver platter. Or I might laugh at the idea of a relatively small British tabletop wargame making it into Dead by Daylight. It's on their radar. It was in the survey. So one way or another, Behaviour is at least aware of Warhammer's existence and relevance as an IP. The only question, therefore, would be whether or not Behaviour would consider Warhammer to be a worthwhile licensed partner from the point of view of business. If there isn't enough enthusiasm in the fanbase for a Warhammer licensed collaboration, I could see them turning the premise down completely, just because it wouldn't make enough money to justify the chapter slot or acquiring the license. But this, dear players, is where we come in. The fact that Warhammer was present in their survey at all indicates that on some level they were at least considering it as an option, floating the idea somewhere. So next time one of these surveys comes around, I want anybody who'd be earnestly interested in Warhammer in Dead by Daylight, whether that be in cosmetics or in a chapter or whatever, to make your voices heard. Games Workshop are so liberal with their license, I firmly believe that if sufficient numbers of players asked for it, we could make this happen. Especially since Behaviour is at least somewhat open to the concept. Warhammer 40k is a big, dark, gothic galaxy with more baggage than a budget airliner, but a game doesn't get to last over 35 years without making a pretty significant impact, both in the tabletop gaming sphere and among the sci-fi horror subgenre as a whole. We've had 3 sci-fi horror chapters in a row in 2023, 4 of my theory about Predator being the next killer turns out to be true, so I understand if sci-fi fatigue is starting to get players down. But that doesn't mean that more sci-fi horror like Warhammer, Dead Space and Bioshock, which I'll be covering in the future, don't you worry about that, don't deserve to have their cases heard. And with Behaviour having their eye on a potential Warhammer collaboration, I can't emphasise enough that if here's something that you want, if the community sees this as something that Dead by Daylight should have, we can get it if we ask for it in sufficient numbers. I don't know if this is the kind of thing that community would want to see, I certainly wouldn't mind seeing it, although it isn't one of the ones I'm gnashing my teeth for. And if you sat through this 6,000 word video, Jesus Christ, it probably is the kind of thing you wouldn't mind seeing either. Maybe the next time a community survey comes up then, where behaviour is asking for licenses that you want to see, bring it up, tick that little box. Because by the Emperor's decree, that is our duty. And one day, maybe our faith will be rewarded. Okay, that's everything I had to say about the hellscape of Warhammer 40k and its suitability for Dead by Daylight. Sorry that this video took so long. I've been very busy, this video is super long, so I had a lot of editing to do, and also I've been wasting a lot of time playing the new Skull Merchant. Okay, I can hear you judging me, but she is genuinely really fun after the PTB changes, and the next comprehensive guide will be covering her, so that'll be coming in the next couple of months, I hope. Feel free to do the whole liking and subscribing ritual if you don't want to miss that. My coverage of our new upcoming chapter will be getting previews of soon, or all the other stuff I do on this channel. Special thanks to my Patreons, who are absolute stars and keep the channel's lights on when otherwise I wouldn't be able to. If you fancy paying a visit and throwing me some support, along with getting a day's access to all my videos, link to my Patreon is in the description, so do go and take a look at that. I guess I'll see you in the next one. Till then, the Emperor protects. Ta-ta for now.